As most of you know, you've been here before, most of you, but what Thrive is we are a group that is dedicated to helping you all survive and thrive and be the best that you can be. Oh, my phone this time wasn't here. Okay. Anyways, that we want to help you survive and thrive and be the best that you can, provide you the right resources. We have an excellent team and crew of the best people to help you achieve as much as you can. And the goal of this Lunch and Learn series is to provide you with information. We also have our monthly consultations if you would like to do that. Whatever we can do to help you is what we are here to do. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Kristyn Berger, who is not only a professional HR provider, which is also a good friend. So thank you for being here, Kristyn.
Of course.
And our focus today is talking about how to help your business survive and thrive in times of change. And a little bit about Kristyn. Kristyn is the founder and president of Berger HR. Kristyn provides employers of all sizes with human resources and organization development solutions, resulting in improved employee and organizational performance while minimizing employment risk. Prior to founding Berger HR, Kristyn worked as a human resources professional in the financial industry for over a decade. Kristyn has experience in performance management, talent development, employee engagement, organizational development, consultative employee relations, learning development, executive managerial coaching and development, and full cycle recruitment. And she serves clients in all areas, and I can tell you from personal experience working with her, with my clients, she definitely does a great job. Kristyn holds an MBA in organization development from Johns Hopkins University and a BA in communications. And with that, Kristyn, thanks for being here.
Great.
I'm turning it over to you and muting mine so you don't hear my kids.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction, Dina. You know, that going through my bio, I think honestly right now, probably the most important thing, or the thing that's top of people's minds, is I'm the HR COVID-19 person. So all of my other qualifications and experiences aside, my team and I over the last several months have been spending a great deal of time answering questions around COVID-19, employee questions, operational questions, you name it. And so I really want to make sure, I think we have, how many do we have on? I can see 4. Do we have some others on too?
Yeah, we have 4 panelists and right now we have 8 attendees.
Perfect. So I want to make sure that, you know, we have some time to answer questions that you have. And so by all means, I'm going to go over with you some of the main things that we're seeing that employees are asking about or are concerned about when they're creating return to work plans. But I certainly recommend that all of you chime in with input if you have any. So to say, if I can share my screen here, Dina.
You should be able to share your screen. It should allow all panelists.
Perfect. I just want to go through, I have a couple slides and I'd be more than happy to share them with any of you as we go through. Let's see. For some reason it's not I'll talk through and then I'll pull them.
I have the slides. You want me to put them up for you?
Yes, if you could. So the main thing is right now, what we're getting a lot of questions of, you know, several months ago, we were really working with clients on coming up with plans for remote work, temporarily closing their business. You know, what do we do now that we're going into, you know, essentially going into lockdown? And so now what I'm seeing is clients have really kind of flipped to, you know, we really want to return to as close to business as usual. What does that look like? And I'm sure many of you know, Governor Hogan moved to phase 2 on Friday at 5 o'clock, which allows several non-essential businesses that previously had to be closed to open. And so we've been getting a lot of questions around that. So what I would say is that most important first step for you is to really think about, you know, what industry are you in, and then check with not just the state, but also with your local county government to determine what is it that you're allowed to do at this time. And once you have a good footing on that, then determine what are we as a business going to do. So some of the questions that I really encourage business owners to ask yourself when going through this phase are, first and foremost, who really needs to return to work? So I know many businesses have moved to having a large portion of their workforce remote. You really want to think through, what makes sense, because just because you can bring everyone back to the office in some cases, I don't know if, certainly chime in if anyone disagrees with me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So, many people right now are working very effectively remotely. And for now, I think if you can continue to allow your workforce to work remotely, that's going to be best. So I encourage clients to think about a couple different buckets. So, the first group is, if you're going to return, if your office is reopening, who are those employees first that must be in the office? So anyone obviously, that's providing direct service to clients. So think of hairstylists, restaurant servers, anyone who's interacting with the public, clearly they need to come back. Also, anyone who's in charge of production. So if you have employees who are working on a production line, in a manufacturing business, or somewhere where they need to have physical access to the office, those should really be your priority one bucket of employees to bring back first and foremost. The next level down is really those employees that it's nice for them to be in the office, but maybe not a necessity. So think about finance professionals who maybe 1 or 2 days in the office is a good way for them to collect checks, to do things that they need to do in the office. Anyone administrative who could really benefit from having 1 or 2 days in the office to have access to the office. And then your third group is really those people who have been working very effectively remotely and can continue to work remotely. And what I'm seeing in that population is it's important to keep track of who's working effectively remotely, and then who maybe is saying, I don't have to come back to the office, I can work remotely, but I'd prefer to. And I'm seeing that a lot among populations. I know, Dina, myself, those who have children at home often will want to return to the office to minimize distractions, people who maybe live in a small space, or just those who are creatures of habit and it's easiest. So, that's kind of the first thing to think about in terms of, who are we going to bring back and when does it make sense to bring them back? Has anyone had a challenge out there with kind of determining when it's right to bring certain employees back to the office? Okay. So once you have those groups separated out, then I think the rest of the questions in the plan becomes much simpler, because you can actually think through your approach and who you're bringing back and at what time. One of the things I'm seeing is people, if they are bringing everyone back, for example, or a good portion back, is having shift work or scheduling, so that if you have 50 people in an office, maybe you don't have any more than 15 or 20 in the office at any given time. It's definitely, you want to think through the logistics, especially for those of you that have cubicles. I find it's been much easier for individuals who every employee has an office, because there's less health concerns. Where cubicles, you want to make sure that you're really thinking through, are we going to have 6 people sitting in a cube farm very close together at the same time? And for those, you might want to have staggered schedules.
Hey, Kristyn, can I hop in with a question real quick? So obviously, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is logistics from inside the company of, should we bring employees back?
Yeah.
Would you recommend companies, especially ones that have kind of that 50 or some of the description we're having, to kind of survey their employees to find out their comfort level of coming in? I mean, obviously it's kind of a two-sided street. You want your employees in there, but you also don't want to put them in a situation where, they feel uncomfortable, or maybe they're going to be less productive because now they're spending half their day sanitizing what it is that they need to do.
Great question, Jeff. And one of the things that we've been seeing as a best practice, we've already seen several businesses send out surveys to the employees where basically they're asking just those questions I talked through. You know, given your position, are you, one, do you need to be in the office to do your job? Would you prefer to be in the office to do your job? Or would you prefer to work remotely? And then another follow-up question I've seen to would you prefer to work remotely is, you know, are there any barriers that we can assist you with in working remotely? Because some people say, you know what, I'm working just great remotely, but a $100 printer would really help me be more efficient, or another screen would help me. And so it's a really good way then to pull that survey data, look at what you've determined as a business as to who you think you need, match that up with what the employees are communicating to you, and then come up with plans first at the, you know, the job level, but then in some cases down to the individual level, especially for those positions. You know, like I think about a lot of our professional services firms, accountants, for example. Half the accountants may say, I want to come back to the office. It's easier for me to do my job. There's less distractions. And the other half may say, I'd really prefer to continue working remotely. And as a business, if you're okay with that, it's just making sure that, you know, you've analyzed it, you know what you need, and then you've communicated what's acceptable to employees. So, but I think that's it's a great way because, you know, everyone, I think the interesting thing about this pandemic is that everyone's reacted to it very differently. So, you know, I know employees who've been chomping at the bit to get back in the office for months, and I know people who are quite happy working remotely. And I think, you know, from an engagement standpoint, meeting the needs of your employees right now should be top priority.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. So a couple other like more tactical things, and we are going to talk a little bit more strategically too, but some of the other things I've seen are common questions to consider are you going to require masks and gloves in the office, and are you prepared to provide them? So in Maryland, we are not required to wear masks. That being said, I know that depending on the office setup, the nature of the business, you know, many businesses are deciding to require or at least recommend employees wear masks. So that's kind of a question that you have to ask yourself, perhaps with guidance of a professional, of what makes sense for your business, and, you know, how are you going to hold people accountable to it, and are you prepared to provide them? And I've seen everything from everyone's required to wear a mask to no one's required to wear a mask. This is me speaking personally, and what I've seen among most clients, it seems like a best practice right now is that people aren't required to wear masks if they're in their own personal space or office, but when spending time in areas that are shared by all, like lunchrooms, busy hallways, bathrooms, that masks are recommended or required. That tends to be what most people are leaning towards at this time. Other things to consider, like the physical work environment that you don't always think about, are coordinating, you know, if you have an office, coordinating with the office manager on, you know, what's the cleaning schedule look like? What are the expectations around employees using elevators, stairways, bathrooms, just so that you make sure that the business and the building management expectations are in alignment and are communicated to employees. Some of the other things, we're going to talk a little bit about employee recognition and gatherings. But the last are, how would you respond? So this kind of goes to Jeffrey, to your comment. How will you respond if some people don't feel safe returning to work? You know, I think through your staff, and is there anyone that you know is going to have, either because of health conditions or just because, you know, the way in which they personally responded to COVID-19, if they don't feel safe, how are you going to best accommodate them? And then last is, once you kind of have an idea of what all of these various expectations and what you're going to be doing in the office are, how are you going to communicate that in a way to employees that's very clear and that they know what to expect when they come into the office? So, I mean, that's really, some things to think about. And again, Dina, you can certainly share these slides with the group. But, those are the main questions that I think you really need to think through as an owner or management team before you can start putting a plan in place. Any other questions or comments from the panel?
So, obviously, oh, go ahead, Andrew. Sound like you had something.
Yeah, I was going to ask Kristyn, one of the things that I kind of been following this even before the COVID thing is when it comes to remote working, and that's it's one thing that a lot of people talk about. They would like to do this in their work and stuff like that. But there's been a lot of mixed studies on the effectiveness of remote working in terms of employee productivity. Some studies say that employees are more productive when they work at home, and then others are saying that they're not. And now that we're kind of forced in this and we're talking about bringing people back, how do you weigh, or how would individual employee productivity, or I guess, what are your thoughts on that whole thing on keeping people as productive as possible so your business can actually survive and come out of this ahead?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, for a job to be suitable for remote work, there's kind of two factors at play. The first is the position itself. So there's some positions that really lend themselves well to working remotely and others that don't. So it's really kind of looking at the job duties and what the job entails. The second piece is the individual. So I find some people work very effectively from home. Others really struggle. And, I think how you can set remote work up for success within your workplace is, one, to be really thoughtful about who continues to work remotely, but then really being clear on expectations, both in terms of, how do you expect employees to structure their day? When do you expect them to be available? What systems are available for them while they're working remotely? But then also to have expectations or metrics that you can use to see how productive people are actually being. So it's more important than ever, I think, when you have people remote, to really think through, what are my expectations? What are the deliverables? So, is there a certain number of widgets that you're expecting them to produce? A certain number of reports or a certain number of client documents? Is there a certain number of calls that you're expecting them to make? Really knowing what does success look like so that you can measure the productivity. Because it is hard, I think, especially if you're not used to working remotely, to know, is someone being productive or not? And usually the two signs are they hitting certain productivity expectations or goals? And then also their availability. One of the things that I've found businesses being frustrated with during this pandemic, having people work remotely, is, every time I call this person, they're not available. And so I think, having certain parameters for when you expect employees to be available by phone, by computer, by chat, et cetera. So, it takes a lot more intentional management, I think, to have a good, productive remote workforce. But I do think there's a lot of benefits that come with allowing employees to work remotely. So if you can make it work and they meet the expectations, it really is it's the way that I think you're going to retain top talent.
I have a follow-up question for you. This one might get a little stickier. Let's say I've got a couple of accountants that work at my company.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all working remotely because accounting work generally is something that could lend itself to remote work.
Yep.
What happens if I've got one or two of my three employees that are meeting productivity standards and working well, and then that third person isn't? Do I bring that one person in, and then how do I do this without making it look like I'm picking on that one person?
Well, that's where I think for the productivity, I think it's really good to kind of have that as part of your remote work policy, or letting them know up front, look, working remotely is a privilege and a big benefit for employees that we want all of you to continue to enjoy. Especially, I think a lot of people have noticed over the course of this pandemic that working remotely, they enjoy it. It gives them flexibility. A lot of business owners too, I think, have realized there's a cost savings. It does provide a better work-life balance in some cases for employees. But I think you have to say up front, one, you have to have a certain level of experience and be in a certain job. Two, you have to make sure that you have the setup and that you're following guidelines in terms of when you're available and, having the home office. And then three, there are certain productivity guidelines. And if you fall short of those, we'll have to talk to you about possibly bringing you back into the office. I would never want to ruin the remote work for everyone because of one person's failure to work effectively remotely. But I do think that having those clear expectations makes it easier to hold that person accountable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So Dean, if we could just go back, a couple things once you've answered questions, a couple things that I find a lot of business owners are saying to me, like, what should we have in place? So the kind of the third slide there, you want to make sure that you have policies, employment policies and operating policies around COVID-19. Individuals like myself, HR consultants are great resources. Your employment attorneys are great resources. Don't try to reinvent the wheel with these things. A lot of times, you can start with a template. SHRMs also, for those of you, the Society of Human Resources Management, you can get forms there. A remote work policy, this kind of goes into our conversations. I think it's good, not even just for this pandemic and returning to the office, but just in general, if you're going to have remote workers, to have a remote work policy. You'll see these access questionnaires. Another thing I've been getting a lot is, how do we make sure that we're screening people if they're coming in the office? And I've had a lot of people recently ask me about taking temperatures. I'll be honest with you, unless you're in a medical type field, I think the benefits of taking employee temperatures do not outweigh the administrative burden and potential ADA violations. So as a best practice, I do think it's a good thing to have, anyone who's been to a doctor's office or anywhere knows there's typically a checklist for you to certify, hey, I'm symptom free. And then also to have a leave request form. And in the rare case, I haven't seen many cases in the last couple weeks, but if you bring people back and someone has to go out because they are exposed to COVID-19 or tested positive, you want to make sure you have a leave request form. But those are the basic things that as a business owner, I'd make sure that I have in place that will make things easier for you administratively once employees return.
So I had another quick question, Kristyn. I know we're kind of getting close to time, and I don't want to be a negative person, but I know there's been a lot of talk about this second wave coming in. So,
Yes.
in the back of business owners' minds, when you start bringing your employees back in because the numbers are down and things are opening back up, obviously you don't want to kind of shut the door on the remote work and the kind of some of the stuff you built up. So does it make sense? Again, we don't want to be, well, maybe we do want to be prepared for the worst and expecting or hoping for the best. Does it make sense to kind of keep at least some of those remote policies in place, or maybe, do something so that you're future-proofing yourself for if this happens, and if it doesn't, great, you bring everybody back in. But, just kind of having that in the back of your mind, is that something that business owners should do?
100%. I mean, that's what, it kind of goes back to the beginning of just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think like right now, I'd be very hesitant. I'd mostly stick to people who must be in the office to do their job full time, or people who, like I said, finance professionals. I know there's some groups where they may say, I really need to come in one day a week. Tell them, okay, only come in that 1 or 2 days a week. Everyone else, I would allow them to continue to work remotely unless you survey your employees and they say you have a couple people who prefer to come into the office. I'd evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. I'd be very hesitant to bring people back unless it's absolutely necessary. I just think it creates risk, and there are a number of people who are still very fearful, and if remote work's going well, why rock the boat on it? I mean, I know clients that are probably not ever going to go back to in the office. Most of the workforce is going to continue to be remote.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that, if anybody has any questions that are on here, feel free to use the chat function, use the Q&A function. We got 1 or 2 minutes left with Kristyn, so this is your opportunity to ask those questions, so please do.
And I will also add that I will email out these slides because they're very helpful and informative. And Kristyn, one thing I would love to hear more about is this
Yes.
and how it applies now.
I'll keep an eye out for questions too, but I think, you know, we've been talking a lot about administrative, you know, policies and more tactical things. And I'm consistently reminding business owners that it's very, very important not to forget that there's humans behind all of this. So, I mean, yes, it's, you know, you need to have a response and you need to have a process, but ultimately it's your people that are going to keep the business successful. And right now, I always think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure many of you have seen in some format or another, but thinking about it in terms of employee engagement, you know, as soon as people have doubts about their security or survival within their company or their job, it's very hard for them to be engaged and give discretionary effort. And I think right now, you know, everyone personally and professionally is being tested in ways that we've never been tested before. You know, people are concerned about, you know, am I going to get my paycheck next week? Is my job going to be stable? You know, I'm still working, but my spouse isn't working. What if I were to lose my job? Or just, you know, this is very different. I feel, you know, my health is threatened. I mean, there's so many different things right now that are causing anxiety for people. That it really does make it harder to be engaged unless you help alleviate those feelings. So I think, you know, as business owners and leaders, one of the most important things we can do is you don't want to sugarcoat or placate things and make people think that things are rosy and sunny if they're not. But I think in a very transparent way, help people feel as secure as possible and make sure that they feel, I think even if there's bad news, I know I've seen many businesses have to furlough employees or lay off employees. I think how it's communicated and how transparent you are, even though the situation may still cause a lot of stress for the individual, transparency helps alleviate that additional fear of like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I think communication right now is really big. As we go through this, but then also so that when we get to the other side, which I don't know exactly when that will be, but we will, that, you know, you are able to retain that top talent. So, and Dina, if you can just go to the next slide, and I know we're short on time. I haven't seen any questions pop up, but, you know, some of the best practices, and I know there's several, I know Andrew does a lot around employee engagement. We typically, when we're not in COVID-19 mode, are involved in employee engagement too. But I think, you know, prioritizing communication is key. Again, you can't overly communicate to employees. So as things are changing in the business, be transparent, communicate. If you don't communicate with employees, they're going to start creating their own stories. So, you know, I saw early on in the pandemic, if business owners weren't telling employees, well, we may have to furlough employees, or, you know, we may have to close the business, employees started creating their own stories. So you want to make sure that you're out there communicating and giving a message. You know, setting clear and reasonable expectations. We've talked about a lot about expectations on this call. I think letting people know, look, we understand this is a unique time, and here are new expectations of you based on what we're going through right now, I think helps employees know what's expected of them, because everything's, again, been shaken up these last several months. Recognizing good work, really, really easy when people are working remotely, especially, to forget to provide that recognition. And employees right now are in some ways working harder than ever. So I think it's important to make sure that you're reaching out, you know, praising employees, providing recognition, even if it's just to say, I know this is a difficult time and I appreciate you, you know, your effort in bearing through it with us. Encouraging work-life balance. A big thing that I'm hearing, I think another downside of remote work is people are actually in some cases working, I think the studies show 3 hours extra a day. You know, people are not commuting and they're not, so it's kind of like the workday never ends. And so I think finding ways to say to employees, you know, take time for yourself. You know, hey, it's Friday. 4 o'clock, I want everyone off, go enjoy time with your family, making sure that people are finding ways to get some rest and relaxation in, and then just creating a collaborative culture, which, I think a key to that is really making sure, especially when you have remote workers, that you have spaces like using Zoom or Google Meet or chat functions to keep people connected. Just because they can't see each other face to face, I think it's important they still interact with each other. And just really the last thing, like the biggest thing is, none of us are going to thrive post COVID-19 if we're not able to engage and retain our top talent. So, really think about when we're 6 months from now, a year from now, when this is hopefully, I don't know that it will ever be, I think it'll stick with us for a while, but the pandemic and the crisis mode of it is over. And I look back, are my employees going to look back on these times and think, you know what, the business treated me well, and I'm so committed to the organization and want to see it succeed. There's many, again, that I think it's easy to take employees for granted during this time and just getting by, but ultimately they'll remember. So creating the great experience is the way to go. But I haven't seen any other questions come through. Any other thoughts from the panelists?
Well, we did have one more question that did pop up. So this came in from Michael. Thank you for asking the question. Thanks for being on the call again. He said, my wife is a dental hygienist and cannot work her full slate of her previous hours because the kid's at home, and her employer said that if she works a few hours, they are obligated to pay her 75% of her previous hours. Is that true? Is that something that you would be familiar with?
So if so my guess is that, without knowing all the specifics, if an employee is still employed by the organization, but they're unable to work a full schedule due to either COVID-19 illness or exposure or childcare needs, they are eligible under the FFCRA for time, either emergency paid sick leave or expanded FMLA. And the first 2 weeks are covered typically at 100%, but then after that, if it's childcare related, it's 2/3. So that they can be paid under the FFCRA, and the employer can get a tax credit in return. So that's probably where that is coming from, and she is entitled to that. There's information, I think I put the link for the DOL FFCRA on the slides. It gives a lot of great information, including frequently asked questions around that. But employees are entitled to that time. And I've also seen some employers with PPP money use the PPP money to kind of bridge the gap in pay. The main thing is, as employers, you can't double dip. You either have to pay them through the FFCRA or you pay them through the PPP. You can't pay them through PPP money and then still get the tax credit, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And hopefully that answers Michael's question. And Michael, you can ask.
Michael, I just allowed you to talk if you want to
Okay,
have
cool.
any follow-up on that.
I do have a follow-up on that. Thank you so much, Kristen. The question is, so let's just say she normally works Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that, and she can't work because childcare needs. So they fill her hours with a different person, different hygienist takes her time. Now she wants her Sundays back, her Tuesdays back, because her kids are now in school. Can they say, well, sorry, we already have somebody else, or can she get those times back that she had lost?
So in the time, so I'm sorry, I was going in and out.
She had specific shifts. She had specific shifts. She used
Okay.
to work Sundays from 9 to 2 or something.
Okay.
Right? Now she says, I can't do it. My kids are home.
Yep.
So they said, okay, we'll find someone else. So they find someone else now who has the 9 to 2 shift. Now she comes back and says, okay, now my kids are available again, or I'm available to work again. But they said, I'm sorry, your hours are not here anymore. They're no longer available.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they should, that, I don't have, I can't speak to her particular employer, but, from the get-go, it would be under, and as I said, if you go to the DOL, there's a lot of information for employers and employees. Mm-hmm. But, if assuming that there was no other childcare available, they should have allowed her to receive that additional pay. And then now that she has a childcare, I mean, as a best practice, even I would say as a business owner, they need to bring her back for her shifts. But by all means, Michael, if you want to reach out to me, you know, my contact information's on there. Don't hesitate to shoot me an email. We can talk through it in more detail.
Sure, I have your contact info.
Yep. And the DOL site for everyone, the DOL site, I've actually been very impressed with the amount of information that the DOL's provided, both in terms of guidance and then the frequently asked questions. So, you know, whether employer or employee side, it's a great resource.
Thank you.
Okay, Kristyn, thanks for joining us today. We kind of hit our time, so we got to wrap this up. I want to remind everybody that you can reach out to Thrive Performance Group, or if you have any more questions for Kristyn, you can reach out to her directly, or we can help you get in touch with her. Next week, our topic is going to be getting what you want from your business with EOS. Our friend Steve Morris is going to be sharing with us, and we hope you guys can join us next week.